industry is witnessing an orbit shifting innovation as it transitions from banking as a product to banking as a lifestyle. But this requires banks to become an agile organization with digital capabilities in their organizational DNA and with reflexes to react swiftly to the changing competitive landscape. But the lack of flexibility in legacy core banking systems is a handicap for banks as they enter an era of open banking and embedded finance. And of course, security becomes tougher to maintain for the legacy core. But despite these inherent challenges, banks are expected to operate like a financial supermarket to meet the multi-dimensional needs of their customers. All that is possible if and only if the banks begin their journey towards cloud computing. Cloud is a key imperative for banks as they strive to transform and scale their business and move to a modern tech stack. Cloud allows banks to democratize innovation and experimentation with possible use cases that can have a business impact. It gives banks the agility to develop pilots and prototypes. And at the appropriate click moment, when a project appeals to the business, IT can then roll it out in double quick time. Hello and welcome to ETCIO Leaders Speak. I'm Sneha Jha, editor of ETCIO, and it is with great pleasure that I bring you this episode of ETCIO Leaders Speak with Sarabjit Anand, Chief Technology and Operations Officer, India and South Asia for Standard Chartered Bank. Good morning, Sarabjit. Welcome to ETCIO Leaders Speak. It is so great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Sneha. And really, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be speaking with you today on this topic on cloud. So really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarabjit. It is our honor to have you on this episode. Now, Sarabjit, traditionally, banks in India have been very careful and deliberate about cloud migration. They've had concerns around data security and compliance, privacy, data sovereignty, the legacy, and the application sprawl. But Standard Chartered Bank is a textbook case of successful cloud migration in the banking sector. So, in this episode of ETCIO Leaders Speak, I thought I'll talk to you about the strategy, the challenges, the success, and lessons learned from your cloud migration. Thought leader Joe McKendrick predicted that IT is a small piece of the cloud story. A much bigger story is unfolding on the business side. The curtain is now opening on cloud computing's second act, which is all about business and new digital experiences for driving the business of banks. How do you see cloud adoption gaining momentum among banks?
Right. I think, as we look at cloud adoption, it has really been ongoing in the industry for quite a few years already. Albeit the caution that banks have adopted over these years to slowly migrate to the cloud. In the last few years, it has gained in prominence and it is being seen as a strategic enabler by organizations with benefits ranging from client experience to scalability to risk mitigation as well as cost optimization. And I really see three key drivers which are acting as a push rather than a pull for banks to start adopting cloud at an even faster pace. The first one, obviously, we all know is the fintech push. The fintechs have come in, they have evolved client experience, And the BFSIs must to stay relevant. We must live up to these client expectations. So that's point number one. The second one is on the pandemic. As we all know, as it came, we first needed to rush to perform remote operations for our clients. So we had to scale up and get going with that. Apart from that, there is exponential growth which we've seen in the digital transactions that have happened, and this is really the pandemic push. So this is the second factor. And the third factor is the client itself. They are expecting hyper personalization. So when I say hyper personalization, it's really offers, deals, and many more things which are personalized to their needs, and which is really coming from the needs of data and how we kind of harness the data. So banks really need to think about cloud adoption in a holistic manner, how they become more tech savvy, how they become more data driven by following a technology roadmap. And we at Standard Chartered have adopted a value based cloud strategy, which is really acting as an enabler to respond to these kind of push factors and the pull factors that are coming in from the outside.
Absolutely, Sarabjit. A lot of banks have had a forcing function for cloud, and the pandemic only served to increase that pressure. There's also a lot of competitive pressure coming in from fintechs and neo banks, and this is kind of um, triggered banks to take a look at cloud model as a force multiplier for their functions. Now, most organizations in the banking sector start their cloud journey with low risk migrations. Many banks have embraced the cloud for the customer facing systems like the mobile banking, online banking, the employee tools like email and video conferencing. Standard Chartered Bank set itself a very challenging objective by selecting its core banking platform, Atlas, as an early migration target. What was the rationale behind selecting it as a lighthouse project?
Absolutely. And as you rightly said it, I think the banks have, and many industry players are actually adopting a very cautious approach. And we at Standard Chartered, as I said, we have this strategy of value-based cloud as our strategy, which we've adopted. Now, we wanted to go out there very quick to the market to make sure we do it. Having said that, we are a bank still. So we adopted a cautious approach to start with. So we've been on a multi-year cloud journey. We started with software as a service for our backend systems like HR and finance. Then we quickly moved on to other banking related software, which is a little low on the criticality, and we started to use infrastructure as a service. Once we moved ahead in that maturity model, we thought we were now starting to get ready with all the learnings we've had with these platforms and the migrations we were doing to move our significant workloads to the cloud. Then came data localization regulation, which actually presented us an opportunity. That's how we saw it. And this is where we started to think about how we migrate our core banking and core payments platforms to the cloud. So, and we're very happy to share that leaving aside fintechs, we are the first bank who have implemented both core banking, which is Atlas, and core payments, which is SC Pay, on the cloud already. And this migration is aligned to our global cloud strategy, which I've mentioned before. And unlike other banks, I think a key advantage that we have is both the core banking as well as the core payments platforms are in-house developed, which gives us increased confidence to move to the cloud. So, and really, when we were thinking about putting this, as I keep saying, it is value-based cloud. The key benefits that we were seeing by adopting such an approach was really in terms of client experience, scalability, as well as risk mitigation. So that's really what paved the way for us to move ahead with our strategy on core platforms like core banking and core payments.
Right. So, Sarabjit, this sounds really interesting, and I want to dig deeper into your migration of the core banking system to the cloud. Now, the core banking system requires exceptional levels of availability, security, and auditability. So, it's a very critical workload to move to the cloud, and as an early migration target, even more so. Since it's a critical workload, it's also a workload where lift and shift do not work as in the case of small applications. You need to refactor, re-architect, make it cloud ready. What were some of the critical and interesting challenges you faced while migrating Atlas to the cloud?
Right, absolutely spot on again. So, this cloud, the whole cloud journey is a learning experience for many in the industry, including ourselves. We are no different. And, as a part of this learning journey where we wanted to migrate things to cloud, I can pick out a few challenges that we faced and share so that it is relevant and people can actually uh, get advantage of thinking through around those aspects. So one of the things that as a bank we would definitely have as a challenge is many banks have proprietary software and licensed software, and moving them to a more modern and open source platforms is a challenge. So really needs a rethink around how we do that. And likewise for us, as I said, we have developed core banking, core payments on which are in-house, right? So we had to refactor, repurpose, and really build these applications from scratch to be cloud native. So that is really how we kind of overcame this first challenge of proprietary software and licensed software. Banks and FIs also have a specific challenge since in majority of the institutions, we would have a complex IT landscape with proprietary legacy applications which have to run. So how do we now bring in these new applications and allow for coexistence of our complex IT landscape? And how do they kind of commingle and work with each other in an efficient manner as they used to in the past? So that's the second thing that we had to deal with and address. And since banks are a very important pillar in the economy and it is a fundamental driver of growth in each country, it's naturally very, very closely regulated. So any major shifts that we make in the bank's infrastructure needs to be aligned to the regulatory requirements in the country, in the geography, for us to be able to implement this successfully. Uh, Many banks have geographical presence, and that also starts to pose a challenge because if you have systems which are hosted in multi-geography, then how do you address that latency challenge? So that's something that we had to deal with and address as we moved along. Uh, the the support model, when you are doing things in co-located data center or cell phone data centers, really you have your in-house staff and you're able to manage that very effectively. As you move to cloud, you have to start to think about how will you now deal with this support challenge with the support coming from the cloud service providers, and how do you embed that with your internal support models to make it seamless end to end. Last but not the least, I think because you are starting to use cloud service providers, governance requirements come into play. So how do you interact with your service providers on an ongoing basis to keep this service seamless and at the same time be able to show exemplary governance? So these I thought were the 5 or 6 challenges which I wanted to share with the audience.
Right. How did you go about mitigating some of these challenges?
Well, I think take for example, I'll pick up, let's say, the regulatory requirements. So we are governed by, as I said, multi-geography. So we had to deal with multiple regulatory challenges. So engaging with our regulators, understanding the needs, understanding the ongoing regulations which are in place, and then working through our architecture, design, and principles to be able to meet these requirements was a way we were able to mitigate that requirement. As I said, we have proprietary software, so there we have to build the software from scratch to be cloud native for it to be efficient and effective, and to be able to work with other other complex IT infrastructure in a cohesive manner. So that's how we could kind of address that challenge. And again, in terms of governance model, we've got very core and strategic alliances with a couple of service providers. And what we have to do is work with these teams closely on a day-to-day basis to be able to arrive at the right governance model. And thankfully, our service providers have really worked with us hand in hand to be able to overcome such challenges.
Sarabjit, you mentioned value-based cloud migration in your first and your second response. So I'm curious to know what are some of the value adds cloud brought to you at Standard Chartered Bank, how will it pave the way for next generation financial services like virtual banking, next generation of payments, open banking, and banking as a service?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it has quite a few advantages and benefits that actually come by adopting an approach like adopting cloud. And as I said, value-based cloud adoption multiple times. So we are really focused on migrating uh, those applications to the cloud, which are going to deliver us value if we do something like that. Else, we would let it remain where it was. So, one of the first things I would want to talk about is client experience. So, and how does it positively impact client experience? If we move it to the cloud, it enables anytime, anywhere access to our banking services. So that was the first one. The second one is around, our core banking and payment services on the cloud. It has allowed us to run far higher available and scalable services. And this has actually helped us respond swiftly to market events. Like you have these online sales that are now announced by very large retailers, right? So it has allowed us to provide seamless client experience because of the availability and scalability factor on the cloud. It has definitely helped us reduce our clouds by moving applications to the cloud because really you can scale up, scale down, and you are moving to a pay as you go model. So that really helps you have a tight leash on a cost in that perspective. And obviously, as we migrate to more open source platforms and platforms on the cloud, it paves the way for a very important dimension, which is partnerships. And you mentioned about virtual banking, open banking. So as we scale up and go into the cloud, it is paving the way for partnerships, which is making it seamless to enable things like virtual banking, open banking, banking as a service, because of the partnership element, which becomes simpler relatively. And there's another element which is now developing in the outside market, which is metaverse. And once you are on the cloud and you have already had these critical experiences, it will allow you to explore the metaverse as a concept as well.
You're right, Sarabjit. The potential and the promise of uh, migrating your core banking to the cloud is huge, and it opens up a lot of different avenues for innovation and experimentation, and also for being able to tap into the next generation of financial services. How has cloud adoption amped up your cyber posture and your resilience posture?
Absolutely, and this is a very, very important and critical point that we must ensure is always maintained at the high standard. So, as Standard Chartered, we have always been committed to adopt the highest level of governance and governance as well as processes around cybersecurity and resilience of our key applications. And notably, cloud service providers are currently at a much mature stage on cloud strategy uh, and its offerings, whereby they have adopted stringent norms which are laid out by regulators in our key markets. So, due to our strategic partnerships with our cloud providers, we've been able to continue to commit to our existing high standards, which revolve around but not limited to things like, let's say, cybersecurity controls, implementation, assessments, and how you demonstrate continuous compliance. There are elements of data privacy controls that come into play, and how do you kind of enable that on the cloud has been an extremely important factor. Security architecture as well as capability assessments, third-party security assessments. So all these are really aspects which are critical, as you mentioned, in terms of cybersecurity as well as third-party governance, which are available as you adopt cloud at the same or higher standards, if not anything else.
Industry research shows that banks are reducing their reliance on legacy mainframe technology and are planning to move a significant portion of their core business functions to the cloud to then be able to launch new products quickly and remain competitive. how should they be targeting the migration of mainframe workloads to the cloud to increase their speed to market and then to be able to bring in product innovation much faster?
Uh, as I said, cloud has been a journey for us for many years now, and even before we moved our core banking platform, which was named EBPS earlier, and now you mentioned about Atlas, right? So we moved it as is from the mainframe to a mid-range platform already quite a few years back. Now that paved the way for us to develop this new platform called Atlas and migrate from mid-range to the cloud. So that was one example of how we have adopted a multi-pronged approach to moving away from mainframe-based applications. And obviously, from a cloud migration perspective, we have the 6R principles, and you touched upon a few, which is refactor, replatform. So we also think about things like rehosting, repurchasing, retaining the same, or retiring the same. So we have a roadmap for our legacy mainframe-based applications. And just to give you an example, we are currently working on a very important platform, which is the credit cards management system, which we currently host on the mainframe. And we are straight migrating it to a platform on the cloud. So essentially, once we have done our core banking, we've done our cards platform. It leaves us with a couple more, and we are thinking about what is our next path to migrate from these mainframe-based platforms to either to in-house or to cloud. It depends on what suits the purpose in each case.
What are the various nuances of building a roadmap for the multi-cloud adoption? What should CIOs be doing to understand the economics of multi-cloud platform and the trade-offs involved? Because it is really important that they achieve the expected value in the expected time. What should they be doing to get that?
Absolutely. And, the cloud is a very powerful tool used to drive innovation, productivity, efficiency, and lot more, right? As more and more providers enter the market with increasingly sophisticated offerings, the choices can really be overwhelming for a client like ourselves, right? So the three major service providers have comparable cloud offerings, but all of them have different strengths as well at the same time. So whilst it is beneficial to adopt a multi-cloud approach, this does lead us into certain challenges to adopt the multi-cloud framework, because each of these providers have their nuances which you then have to deal with. And then if you have to move towards adopting a multi-cloud approach for one particular application, then with a provider A and a provider B, how do you kind of join them together so that they can coexist in two different provider locations? Okay. If you choose an approach, let's say to adopt for X number of applications, a provider, and Y number of applications, a B provider, that approach is simpler relatively to adopt a multi-cloud approach. But for a particular application, hosting it on two is a far more challenging activity. But thankfully, as I said, we've got strong partnerships with our providers. And for a particular application to be hosted, we are working through with our providers to ensure they can then talk to each other and coexist at the same time. Now, some of the advantages, it delivers growth, innovation, productivity. However, we need to kind of continue to work with our providers because we have to deal with different cloud management standards that may be present for these service providers. Uh, there are factors like the size of the business, the geographic expanse, the industry, and most importantly, business objectives, which play a very key role in defining the optimal multi-cloud setup that you have. And for long-term success, it's important to build a model that is flexible and can adjust to future and changing client expectations, changing regulations, business objectives, and cloud service provider capabilities as well. So that's really, I would say, in terms of how the coexistence and existence with multi-cloud providers can be a challenge, but also there are opportunities you can work together to actually make it happen.
Right, absolutely. And it's such a dynamic world that the business landscape is always evolving, the business imperatives are evolving, the customers' needs are evolving. So you really need to be very flexible in how you approach your cloud model. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarabjit. It's been wonderful talking to you. You opened up your playbook and you also gave us a peek into how you went about your cloud migration, some of the learnings that you had, and you also gave us some very practical and actionable insights into how the CIO community can go about their cloud migrations in the banking sector. Thank you so much. It's been delightful talking to you today.
Thank you very much, Sneha, for hosting me. And it's been an absolute delight and pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarabji. The pleasure is all mine. I hope you liked this episode of ETCIO Leaders Speak with Sarabjit Anand, Chief Technology and Operations Officer, India and South Asia for Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you for watching.